where to start. Hi guys, welcome to my channel. So I'm sure you can tell by the title of this video that today I'm going to be telling you my story about being 14 and pregnant. So basically it all started when I started at a new high school. So I transferred schools right after my 8th grade year, and I went to a small little private school for my freshman year. And at the school is where I met my now husband. So I was a freshman and he was a senior, and we started dating. And at the time that I found out that I was pregnant, we had been dating for almost a year. So basically, I started getting migraines a lot, and that's not really something that is new for me. I've kind of always had migraines since as long as I could remember, and I guess that was probably like my first sign of being pregnant. I was getting a migraine every single day. I woke up every single morning with an awful migraine, and I just always felt sick to my stomach. Now, mind you, I was 14, so it never crossed my mind that I would potentially be pregnant. So I guess really I didn't really like keep track of my period like ever. I played sports and it just kind of always came when it came. I never really knew when it was coming. I just never kept track of it. So I don't even know how long I had missed a period before I started getting symptoms. But one day I was really sick. I woke up one morning and I could hardly get out of bed. I was puking all day. Every single thing that I tried to put into my body, I just puked right back up. And this went on for like a bit over 24 hours. It was like a day and a half. And my parents had called my family doctor. And he said that if I didn't pee in like the next handful of hours, that I needed to go to the emergency room and get checked out and to see what was going on, whether that be just getting like a bag of fluids or whatever. Well, that didn't happen. I didn't end up going to the bathroom, so I had to go to the ER. And I spent, oh gosh, I don't even know how long in the ER. They gave me a bunch of medicine for the migraine and the nausea, the vomiting, that whole shebang. Well, I just slept the whole time that I was there. And then I remember waking up and they were like, hey, you have to leave us a urine sample before we're allowed to let you go home. Okay, yeah, sure, whatever. So I left them my urine sample and I went back to my room and went back to bed. Well, about, I don't know, an hour or so later, my mom walks in the room and she's like holding her chest and she's like, oh, I'm gonna have a heart attack. She's like freaking out. So I'm kind of like, oh crap, what's going on? Is like something seriously wrong? Like, I don't know. But I was like, whatever, like she's overreacting, like I'm sure it's nothing, whatever. So I go back to bed. Well, a little while later, a doctor comes in and he wakes me up. He sits right by me on the bed and he looks at me and he's like, you're pregnant. And I was like, what? No, I'm not. And I just kept telling him over and over, like, no, I'm not pregnant. I'm not pregnant. I'm not pregnant. Well, basically once he said that to me, I kind of was like, okay, yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. Like, that would make sense, you know? So I was with my mom. My mom and my dad are divorced. So I was with my mom. She's the one that took me to the hospital. And it was like 3 o'clock in the morning when we were heading home. You know, on the whole drive home, she was like, we have to tell your dad. And my dad is very religious, and I knew that he would freak out. So I was telling her, like, no, we're not telling him. We're not waking him up to tell him. Like, we're not doing that. Well, of course, we woke him up, and she sat down on the couch, and she was like, our daughter's pregnant. And my dad just basically lost it. Like, he lost it. He freaked out on me. He was screaming and yelling at me. It was just chaos. Which, I mean, it's to be expected. You know, you're 14 and you're gonna have a baby. Like, you're a baby yourself. Like, of course, if that was in my situation, I'm sure I would freak out as well. So, you know, he freaks out. He starts yelling at me, going on about this big, huge thing about how am I gonna raise a kid, blah, 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 blah. All this while they had taken my phone away while I was still in the hospital. So my boyfriend at the time had no idea about what was going on. It wasn't until a little bit later that night that my dad actually texted him, which I didn't know this happened at the time, but he texted him at like 4 or 5 in the morning and was like, congratulations, you're gonna be a dad. Well, of course, he starts freaking out and he doesn't really know what to do or to say. And I hadn't talked to him at all during this time. So like I wasn't able to let him know what was going on or anything like that. So basically right after I found out, they didn't want us seeing each other. They didn't want anything going on between us. They just wanted to cut the whole relationship off. Well, I mean, that's kind of hard to do when you're having a kid. So, you know, we would talk every once in a while. I still got to see him. I didn't get to see him as much, and there was obviously no unsupervised time between us. Either his parents had to be around or my parents had to be around in order for us to hang out. So, you know, we hung out, we saw each other as much as we could. So then, fast forward, you know, a handful of months, I'm in the beginning of my 3rd trimester. I've been to the doctors, I've had the appointments, I've had the ultrasounds, you know, everything's going fine. And when I hit 28 weeks, I had gone to a doctor's appointment. It seemed like your typical doctor's appointment, like nothing out of the ordinary. I had actually just walked out of the room and I was in the hallway waiting for to schedule my next appointment. And my doctor walked up to me and she was like, you know, are you feeling him move? Is he kicking enough for you? Asking those kind of questions. And I let her know, yeah, like he's moving, but he's not moving quite as much as like he normally does. Maybe he's just sleeping right now. She says, okay, we're gonna have you go to this other room and sit on a monitor for a little while and just to make sure, just monitor the heart rate, just to see that everything's okay. So fine, whatever, we go, we sit in the room. She like has me on the monitor for probably like 30 minutes or so, and she comes in and tells me that I'm having like a bunch of contractions, which when she said that, like I knew I was feeling something, but I didn't know that was what it was. So she had me go to the hospital. I went to the hospital and I got hooked up to some more monitors. They checked me and I was already dilated, so they ended up keeping me. Long story short, I ended up staying in the hospital for about a week on medications and things to keep me from contracting, pain meds, all that kind of stuff to try and keep me from going into early labor, all while they were like giving me all the information and kind of telling me everything that would happen if I did actually go into labor and deliver him that early. During that time at our stay in the hospital, we had this lovely little nurse who asked me my age, and I think during the time that we were in the hospital, I had just turned 15. So I, told her, I'm 15, gave her my date of birth. And then my boyfriend was there also, and she asked him how old he was. And that just ended up being a whole nother story that I can make a different video on if you want to hear about that. But basically, everything ended up being fine. I didn't go into early labor with him. I went into labor at 37 weeks. I was walking around Kohl's looking for some PJs to put into my hospital bag, and I started getting really, really bad contractions. I kind of had contractions from the time that I was hospitalized until the time that I delivered. It was kind of an ongoing thing. I was taking like daily medications for it. I was in and out of the hospital all the time, getting monitored and getting checked because they didn't want me to go into active labor. But I started getting contractions at Kohl's at 37 weeks, and they were different. They were different than the ones that I normally felt. They were a lot more intense. So we called my doctor. I went in and they checked me. I was at 3 centimeters, and in the middle of her checking me, my water broke. So obviously at that point we knew that we were staying and that we were going to be having a baby. And then labor was awful. It was just awful. I swore that I would never have another kid because it was just that awful. I was in labor for over 24 hours. I got the epidural once I hit about 5 centimeters. And then I started to feel the urge to push. So, everybody comes in, they all kind of get ready for you. My dad and my boyfriend were in the room when I actually delivered. First labors are always said to be the worst. I was actually pushing for 6 hours, and it was awful. It was absolutely awful. The doctor ended up having to up my epidural 2 times, maybe 3 times in the matter of like me pushing. And then we actually had to use the vacuum to get him out because he was sunny side up. So his face was up towards like the top of my pelvic bone instead of like facing downwards towards like my butt. The doctor tried to manually rotate him, and that just was not happening. Like, no, not happening. So he said, either we can do a cesarean now or we can try the vacuum. If that vacuum doesn't work, then we will have to do a cesarean because you just won't be able to get him out. So we did the vacuum, and luckily the vacuum worked, and he was born, and he's so beautiful and so perfect. And he's 6 now, and he's all grown up, and I don't know what I'm gonna do. After I had him, things were rough. It's hard taking care of a newborn, whether you're 15 or 30. I don't think that really makes a difference. Babies are hard. I spent the first night with him with my stepmom and my boyfriend there, and it was just awful. It was so bad. I didn't know how to breastfeed. I didn't know how to take care of a kid even a little bit. I was lost. All he did was scream and cry, and I didn't know what to do. So basically, that first couple nights that he was in the world were just so bad. I remember spending most of the time in the hospital just crying because I didn't know how to do it, how to take care of a kid. But eventually things started to kind of click a little bit. One of the first night that I was actually home from the hospital, one of my best friends came and stayed the night with me. She helped me make bottles in the middle of the night because at that point I had completely given up on breastfeeding. It was painful. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't feel like he was eating at all. So I had completely given up. I tried pumping during that day, but that was easily just as hard. So one of my friends came and stayed with me for the first night. And then, after I had him and he had started to get bigger, I was homeschooled. So I was homeschooled for my sophomore year because we found out that we were pregnant with him the summer after my freshman year. And since it was a private Baptist school, I was not allowed to go back. So I was homeschooled for my sophomore year. So eventually things did not really work out. I mean, I was always like a good student. Like when I was in school, like I'd never really had an issue with like keeping good grades or anything like that. It's just, it was a whole new world trying to raise a newborn and go to school at the same time and be home and not really have like a social life, like not really talking to anybody. I mean, it was really depressing and just kind of sucked. So after my sophomore year, I got my GED. And shortly after that, I ended up going to school for my MA, which is a medical assistant, which is what I do right now. And it's been a ride, Things don't always work out the way that you imagine them to. Obviously, I would have never imagined that I would have been 14 and pregnant and 15 years old and trying to raise a newborn, trying to keep the relationship with, my boyfriend, trying to still have friends and do things, and it's hard, I'm glad that I was able to get my GED and that I didn't have to be homeschooled for my sophomore, my junior, and my senior year, because I literally don't know how I would have done it. Like, I don't know how I would have done it. But, things happen for a reason. We were young, we were naive, we obviously didn't think things through. But the bright side of that whole situation is now we are married. We've been married for going on 4.5 years now. We have 3 kids now, and we're doing good. It doesn't always end in a catastrophe. It doesn't always end up being a single mom with the dad leaving or whatever. I was very lucky that my boyfriend, he stayed around, he stuck by me, he supported me, he was always there for me, and he is still now. It doesn't always end the way that you see in life. Yes, that is probably the more common thing to happen, but there are times where girls get lucky, girls do get a good guy, and they do end up living a great life and being in love and just having a good life. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to share my story, because I don't want somebody that was, you know, is in my situation, feeling like they're all alone and that they don't have anybody and that nobody's ever been through that. Like, I just feel like my story could maybe somehow, some way bless somebody down the road. It hasn't been easy by any means. There are a lot of difficulties that you go through with being so young and trying to raise a kid while you're still trying to figure out who you are yourself. But yeah, things do work out, and you can get your happy ending and you can get your fairy tale, because I did, you know. It's not the norm, but it does happen. So if I can be a blessing to one person with this video, then I'd be happy. So yeah, that's my story, you know. That's my story of being 14 and 15.